that every time there's like a new event or a new something different in our store, I keep saying to myself, we're finally a real bookstore. And I know we've been a real bookstore before, but wow, this is really an honor to launch this particular book for lots of reasons. I'll be honest with you, I haven't gotten all the way through it yet. I'm on page 137, I think, right now. But it has caught my attention, and it is fabulous. And it's just really, Patrick, it's an honor that you chose here to launch it. And I don't know if you noticed, well, some of you haven't seen it yet, but Noam Chomsky wrote a review of the book, and that's really cool. I just feel like that helps make us a real bookstore. This is a story that has made me feel like I need to dive deeper into history. And I'm gonna ask Tushar and Lolita to give me a summer reading list for the summer. Because I feel like I need to teach myself more to truly appreciate and understand Patrick's book.
And you could share that list with us.
I will share that list with you all. So anyway, welcome to Pearl Street Books. Unfortunately, we do not have a restroom here. And the coffee shop is closed. If you do need to use a restroom, the bodega is very generous and lets us sneak over there.
What do we do if we need to use the restroom?
Sneak over to the bodega.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I think I'll be fine.
Okay. All right, I have started to begin every event at Pearl Street Books with a land recognition statement, because I think that's really important. So I'm going to start that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tushar, who's going to introduce Patrick. And then Lolita and Tushar are going to help facilitate a lovely conversation. At the end, we'll open it up to questions from you all. And at the very end, a chance to have your books signed. Books are available here at Pearl Street Books. All right, so let us begin this evening with a land recognition statement. We recognize that this bookstore occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both federal and state governments repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future. We at Pearl Street Books are committed to amplifying the voices of traditionally marginalized and oppressed peoples through the books on our shelves and the gatherings in our store. So thank you for coming out tonight. This book is really an important story to tell. Tushar, it's over to you.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Beth, for having Pearl Street Books. Amazing. So, like Beth, I'm actually not going to write you part of the reading list you asked for, because they're really like teachers of mine. They're also very close friends, both Lolita and Patrick. And so I'm not going to give you this academic introduction. If I read out every book in abstract, it would take me 45 minutes. And that's not talking about the 200 plus papers that he's also published. Instead, I'm going to tell you how open Patrick and Lolita have been ever since we met when I moved to La Crosse. And there's no one else I know in town who I can talk about Tagore, Ozu, Tarkovsky, Chomsky. You can pick any subject in the world. It could be us talking about Ali Akbar Khan and Raga Sabari. And there's no one else I know who I can do that with. This is a house where I can. And thanks, Patrick. Let's hear about your book.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll read a few passages from it. I'm mostly not going to explain much about the novel. I will say a couple of things beforehand. One thing, I think most of the background will be filled in by what I read. But one thing to mention is that it's of course a fiction, including the country that the colonial country represented in the novel. Samota is not a real place, but almost all of the incidents are based on actual things that occurred in British, French, or other modern colonies. And much of the social structure that I discuss derives from particular colonial histories. So for example, the three main ethnic groups treated in the novel are referred to as Songari, Kalan, and Samotan, the main one being Samotan. And the structure and their relations are principally derived from the relations between the Hausa Fulani, the Yoruba, and the Igbo in what is now Nigeria. So for example, the conquest of Somaliland draws heavily on what occurred during the British conquest of Igbo land in the early 20th century. So, and indeed that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make it a fictional, I wanted to treat a fictional colony, was to allow the possibility of those multiple references rather than sticking to one set. So it begins with the following note. The following pages provide transcripts from the notebooks of A, a linguistic anthropologist treating his time in colonial Samoa following the First World War. In addition to their purely sociological interest, A's observations and translations give us a unique perspective on the background of a region that, as readers are no doubt aware, continues to figure in today's headlines due to its ongoing civil conflict and resulting refugee crisis. In some cases, the notebooks include loose sheets of extraneous materials, such as news clippings and transcribed interviews as well. Given the controversial nature of A's claims about colonial governance, including what amounts to assertions of criminal malfeasance by individual administrators, and due to the stigmatizing nature of the accusations leveled against A himself, the editors have chosen to alter some marginal details in order to prevent positive identification of those involved. In keeping with this, we have felt compelled to excise most of A's references to his personal life, education, and so forth. Our caution in this regard extends to the use of names, for which we have often substituted single initials, as in the case of the author himself, here referred to as A. In two instances, we have retained the personal nicknames used by A for his colleagues, Stanley in one case, alluding to H.M. Stanley of Stanley and Livingston, and Napier, alluding to C.J. Napier, presumably due to his famous pronouncement Peccavi. Neither was the actual name of the colleague in question. When the British East India Company engaged in battle for domination of Sind in South Asia, and led by Napier, Napier telegraphed his superiors to announce the outcome of the battle, and in order to save money or just to be amusing, he wrote simply Peccavi, which translates as I have sinned, S-I-N-N-E-D, but of course it's a pun. I have S-I-N-D, the province. So that's what that refers to. A initially does not know Samoan. He knows Kalan, a related language, but he is sent to the colony. He meets his administrative superior, who is represented here simply by the initial G. And right at the beginning, he goes on a sort of tour of the various Samoan villages. I'll read just a bit about that. These are, again, from the notebooks of A. We set off tomorrow for towns further inland. The area is claimed by the Songari Empire. Samotans dispute this. It was never effectively administered, hence the presence of the red men, as they term us, with our tax collectors and liquor merchants. The latter are here in force, Well, one of them is here in force, some fellow named Stanley or something. Thus far, our military policies and mercantile personnel have failed to, quote, advance the, quote, backward areas. Taxes are paid irregularly, and the sales of imports are negligible. In Kayla, they tell me, the majority of imports come in bottles. Apparently, gin serves as one medium of exchange there. This is apparently true in much of Nigeria, for example. Imagine what they would do if they ever got the likes of a real brew, the likes of poteen. He makes an occasional Irish joke in the course of his notebooks. So, of course, something has to be done about this backwardness. Thus, Jeeves decided that I will have company on the scientific tour of the area. First Stanley, then Al, whose father is ambassador to ellipsis marks. Then I learned we shall require 4 extra carriers for gin. After I objected, G insisted that I did not yet understand how things work in the colonies, and that this was all just part of the process of, quote, reconciliation after a period of, quote, misunderstandings. Met the Kalen guide, insists that his name is Bobby. He wears a cross, doesn't seem to know much English. Perhaps there are missionaries preaching in Kalen. Goes to G's services, the superior is a reverend. Though what he gets out of them, I can't imagine. He did say with great enthusiasm that he hopes they have Jesus in Genbosch, village to which they're traveling. Did G fail to mention that Jesus is not around just now? Does Bobby imagine him traveling from village to village with the tax assessor? But of course it's not his fault. It actually turns out later that we find out that Reverend G serves pumpkin pie in the afternoon following the church service. And so, retrospectively, one can infer that what Bobby actually hopes that they have in Genbosch is pumpkin pie, which he refers to as Jesus.
There you go. As you do.
Yes. Arrived in the first village, Genbosch, actually quite close, but with no road. The trip took almost 11 hours. Left just at dawn, almost exactly 12 hours of daylight. Stopped twice, mostly savanna, but a stretch of rainforest near the town. Probably only a few miles, but quite difficult. Entering the village, most of the people seemed to look with fear, distrust, maybe anger. Not pleasant anyway. Well, how would the folk in Corofin take to a troop of Sassaniks marching into town at dusk with rifles and pith helmets? Sassaniks is the Irish for English. So they go from this village to the reserved areas. The reserved areas are clearly modeled on both the Native American reserves in North America and the Bantustans in South Africa. And they're populated by indigenous peoples who are effectively coerced into manufacturing or mining jobs by tax laws, which was a common strategy used by colonizers. Degdud is close, but we're headed for the reserved areas. They're much farther and mostly through rainforest. We have turned to the east toward the Victoria Township, our model reserved area. There's a path, but it is not always clear. Does not seem much traveled. We have passed 2 small villages in narrow spaces of savanna where the forest retreats, deserted, overgrown with elephant's foot and tussocks of orchard grass. Some of the huts were smashed in at the door or windows, clay crumbling from the frame. Thatching had worn through in patches. Behind one, a nest of rats, pale, raw-eyed, just born in the shadowed crook of wall and flattened earth. We stopped to camp, the flies swarming to clouds of frenetic particles, clustering at the netting of the tents, working their way in. Mosquitoes, too, broad as a thumbnail. They leave huge welts that bleed when you scratch. But on the whole, not as bad as it might be. The right season, G said. Not too stifling and no rain. We'll make it easily tomorrow. next entry, reach the reserved areas. Even at first glimpse, there is something sordid about them. Constructed according to a single plan, not, of course, any traditional Samoan structure, the Cartesian grid, shacks like identical latrines, indistinguishable but for a small number to the left of the door, on all on nameless streets, also identical, all parallel or at right angles, a perimeter of rocky soil, worthless for plantation. The director of the camp tells me it is set aside for gardens. It crumbles to dry dust and shards of stone in one's hand. Samoan villages, though adjacent to farmland, are bound on the other sides by water or forest. Here there is just dry, pale, useless dirt for miles. The people seem angry with perhaps the place itself, the whole area in its starkness and light, the earth bare, the white cubes of houses, the gravel of limestone, and the chalky dust that swirls up into the air and coats the skin of sweating workers, painting them as if before a ceremony of initiation or of sacrifice. I would say they were vampiric, but I suspect that is just what they think of me, with my face white as dust, though not my arms and hands exposed to the sun and red as raw meat. At night there is more life in them, but then they don't just ignore me, brushing past as if I were not even on the path, as if I were invisible as a wandering wraith. Perhaps that is how they think of me. It would be impolite to greet the homeless dead. Such a greeting would acknowledge that their spirits haunt the earth, that they have not been born again into the land of cool breeze, on a far island in a wide lake hidden deep within the bush. This is all basically a derivative of Igbo cosmology. Most of morality, I'm afraid, is luck. I believe the locals here agree with me. Those who are unlucky, or so I am told when people here agree to speak, those who are unlucky do not pass through the soft earth, under the seas, surfacing like moles into the land from which all the ancestors watch over and guide the welfare of the living. No, instead they are tied down to the place where something failed them: health, friends, the capacity to reason through to the likely end, something necessary and fragile, something that sustains all of us, something we rely on. When that failed, they failed also. They did something that could never be erased, a crime against someone else or against themselves. Suicides can never enter the fields of the ancestors. This act, whatever, was like a sacrifice, and their heart remained bound to the place of offering, fixed to the sticking place like a dog leashed to a tree, a child tied by a length of rope to the final column of the balustrade, so he won't run out the door into the street. They wander about, their faces pale, gaunt, horrified and astonished at what has happened. But how could they ever mistake me for such a zombie, you might ask, gentle reader? Well, it is not that far-fetched. I'm not one of them, you see. And of course I am not an ancestor either. I'm caught in some strange in-between, neither part of the living nor part of the dead, a freak, a monster. I do not have the sense that most people, here I introduce a character named Reverend Innocent. Reverend Innocent is a Samoan. Is a Samoan who is a collaborationist. He undertakes the task of propagandizing for European culture, Christianity included, but largely, basically anything of European culture, and this greatly advances him. He's very close to the Reverend G in the novel, and he ends up having, well, I won't give away what happens to it at the end, but he recurs throughout the novel. I do not have the sense that most people share Reverend Innocent's enthusiasm for us. and our peacekeeping rifles and humanitarian interventions. From the history of Ireland, that is just what I would expect. Of course, we had nothing parallel to the cultural preservation provisions of the Sangari treaties. If they had left my ancestors to worship as they wished, had allowed them to wear their own type of clothing, cut their hair as they had before, speak the language they had always spoken, but above all to worship as they wished, to pray in what they considered a sacred language, to believe in the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church and its mediatory function between God and humankind, and its doctrines of the Immaculate Conception, the Virgin Birth, the 7 sacraments, the 3 persons of God, its rituals, its festivals, its administrative structures. If my ancestors had been allowed to follow these ideas and acts without prejudice, without punishment, without being subjected to fines or restrictions, would they have cared whether the king and queen lived on one island or the other? I find it hard to imagine, but perhaps there is, as they are fond of saying, a new dawn in the protectorate, a time of opportunity and learning where we shall provide the backward peoples with the benefits of civilization, like parents provide food and shelter and education to their children, and we shall help them grow into full citizens of the world. But then, having said this, I wonder, what are those benefits of civilization? Medicine, perhaps, but new medicine is balanced by new guns, and I seem to see more of the latter than the former. I do not carry a revolver myself, probably shoot my hand off trying to load the thing, but Stanley has one, so does Elle, and everywhere we go, we are accompanied by 3 Sangari guards with rifles. As far as I can tell, there is no physician resident in the reserved areas. There is, however, a garrison of police, small, but I am told, quote, efficient, unquote. Only 5 or 6 miles outside of Victoria Township, a couple of hours. First the stench and the loud hysterical flies. We heard them, then saw the corpse, face down in a soft patch of earth. Frightened off 2 hyenas with the guns. There's a new guide, a Samotan, a boy of 14 or 15. He speaks Kalen. Quote, they have shot him in the back, unquote. I see bullet holes in the white camise. Some of the boys wear it open in the front, a sort of fashion, and the black stains of powder. I do not know who has shot him or why. The back of his head is strange. It is crushed in. Another gunshot, a club I do not want to approach. Quote, perhaps he had money, robbers. No one wants to turn him over, no one wants to check the front of his sarong for the pouch of coins carried by traders. I see maggots moving along the edge of the wound, leaving a clean rim of skull. Quote, no, he was only carrying coconuts, a basket on his head. There it is, overturned. I see the finely woven basket, empty, resting against a trunk on a shoulder of thick grass. Around it, a half dozen coconuts. They are all along the path leading to this place. Quote, they are all along the path leading to this place. They were. Quote, they are all smashed, sir. The coconuts, all of them, sir. Scattered, broken, open, the meat drying in the cup of shell. Then a cluster of them also cracked apart on the far side of the corpse. Could it be a random act of terror, an attempt by some rebel group to instill fear in the populace? But why would they go to such pains with the coconuts? Why delay when several battalions of Sangari troops are stationed near the reserve? Why risk an encounter? We were told this area was safe, that rebel activity was confined to the mountains and the foothills, which are far away. So there's obviously quite an extensive rebellion going on, and the A gets more and more hints of this. It becomes more obtrusive, despite the administrative propaganda that says that it's a band of 50 or 100 lunatics. The coconuts, by the way, this comes, I think it was in Shimla. We were having dinner with a group of, anyway, it was somewhere in India, one of the times we were in India, and the person I was sitting next to, an older man, said that he had been involved in the militant insurrectionary events in the early 1940s in India. And he described to me how they used coconuts to make petrol bombs. And that's where I derived the business about coconuts. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna. Oh, yeah, should I say that one? Do you think, I don't know. This may fail entirely because it relies on the way I read it, and I'll try, but who knows. Anyway, as you know, A is a linguistic anthropologist, so he's interviewing native informants, as they're called, about the culture as well as specifically linguistic factors. And so he's been asking people about kinship relations. And one of the people that he's interviewing makes a joke with him, and he responds rather heatedly, "But you must marry within the kinship group complementary to both kinship groups of your parents." She don't know why I answered so earnestly. In any case, she looked at me with genuine confusion. I thought it was the language and tried to make the point clearer. Had to speak as usual with great circumlocutions, not knowing all the proper words. And then there are the problems of case, inflection, etc., everywhere where Samotin and Kalin differ. Finally got the point across. "Where did you learn this?" she asked me. I explained. "I don't wish to cause you sleepless nights worried over the sincerity of my compatriots and their reliability, and the reliability of what we tell you," she began, "but I think this was all a big joke for them, and they are probably still laughing at this very time. I'm so sorry." Quote, "Yes, I can tell by the smile bigger than your whole face that you're so sorry." Didn't it occur to you that no one could ever get married by such a system? And yet Samoans get married all the time? Yes, it did actually, but I assumed there must be some way around that. You red men in short pants are not very through thinking, are you? So it turns out some of the lads were doing it for gas. I suppose it won't be the last lot of untrustworthy informants I come across. Of course, even if they are trustworthy, what do they know? We act as if Samotans or Kalins or Songaris, Hindus or Chinese or Burmans are all experts in their cultures, erudite about everything from practical details to systems of underlying significance. Would we ever assume the like at home, asking a band of boyos to explicate theology or political economy or even English grammar? What's the difference between a stone and a rock? A stone is harder, I'd say. No, it's flatter. I think rocks are more uneven, and you could cut yourself on one of them if you fell on it, or if you tried. What bloody idiot would be trying to cut himself on a rock? Probably yourself. Well, I wouldn't be trying to cut myself on a stone, that's for sure. Imagine what picture of Christianity would emerge from interviews at the local watering hole. Someone ought to do it, a linguistic and ethnographic mission to the corner pub. Pick out five party fellows seated under the sign of the bearded pig's head and ask them about the Eucharist or about marriage customs. Eucharist? I'm only guessing now, but I say that would have to be whatever of all the items being discussed happens at that time to be the most euchre. The grammaticists call it the expletive, seeing as how it is the most extreme. That's superlative. Now you're caught me. No, I meant the word is superlative. Eucharist, oh, a fine word entirely. Oh, buy that idiot a pint and at least we'll have a peace. We'll have peace for the space of a few swallows. Oh man, what would old Father O'Mahanan say about a baptized Catholic who doesn't know the meaning of the Eucharist? Are you not a regular communicant then? Is that what it is, the wafer? It is indeed. Oh, bloody hell. Forgive me, Jesus, for blaspheming this day. Sure, you didn't know what you were doing and what you were saying. So it's no different from usual in that, eh? Like Simon Peter when he denied the Roman soldiers 3 times and Jesus said he knows not what he does. Read your Bible, you ignoramus, or stick to what you know. Like the price it'll cost you to get 6 pence worth of bad porter that has a taste on it like rat's piss that's gone stale. I'd say a shilling. Remind me to collect some mouse water and sell it to that boyo there. But the fellow is still asking about the Eucharist. Well, that would be the body and blood of our Savior. No, I think it's the body only. The wine, that'd be the blood. But isn't the wine Eucharist too? I thought you said it was the wafer. How would I know? You're the one with 2 sisters in the convent and your brother studying to be a priest and join the missions. And then it'll be explaining the Eucharist to all those half-naked savage women. And I was asking about marriage and kinship. Who can you marry and who can't you? Oh, that's an easy one. You can't marry your own family or an odd-numbered cousin. I've actually heard this from relatives in Ireland. You mean you can't marry a 5th cousin, but you can marry a 2nd cousin? No, you can't marry a 2nd cousin either. No, you're wrong on that one. A 2nd cousin is fine to marry, so long as it's on your mother's side, because you don't have the same name. Sure, you don't want to be marrying someone with the same name. You know, I had from my personal acquaintance the family of the locals down in Connemara, where the husband's name was Hogan, and the wife's name was Hogan too. Well, of course they were both named Hogan. They were married proper in the church. I know them myself. In Mullingar they are, isn't it? No, it was Connemara I'm after telling yous. Well, I don't know them at all. Was there something wrong with the marriage then? Was it living in sin they were? I've heard some of the country people have been known to do that. But I'm trying to tell you it's not sin unless the 2 of them were odd-numbered cousins. Oh, would someone put a white cork in the center of that mush before we all die like martyrs from the pain of hearing his stupidity and idioticness? So.
That was good.
Oh.
That was great. Well, that's fabulous.
Even his most negative construal of the colonial situation falls short of the actual conditions as he begins to interview people on their experience of the reintegration, it was called, and which the local people, the Samoans refer to as the violation, same, which I explained in Samoan is the same word as rape for obvious reasons in this case. And I give some transcripts of the interviews. I'm not going to read any of those, but just so you know, that's what comes. It's that sort of change that occurs with the character. And in the same sequence of development, when he returns to the initial settlement where Reverend G is the provincial officer, we see the insurgency come closer and closer and become more and more obvious, including a point, culminating in part in a point when 2 English officers are killed and thrown into the central hut, which is the sort of courtyard area, piazza area in the middle of the any village or anything. Thrown into the middle of the settlement, the British settlement there, with drinker of blood, carved in Samoan letters on their forehead. That relates to the vampire theme that I brought up.
Irish too, and Irish.
Yes, right, that's right.
And I can put it, this sheet with its empty space there on the second shelf on the bottom.
So, in parallel with this, A is learning about the culture of the Samoan people.
Let me
Among other
trade
things,
books, so I wanna have
finds that they have
sign that one when you trade.
a well-developed epic tradition. And the epic is, they have a wide range of poets who are in sort of hereditary groups. And the hereditary group that is in charge of the main epic is, has a primary figure who is, so to speak, in charge of reciting the Dream of Garna, it's called, through their main epic. And one of, it's a dual sex system as the Evo had. And so there are systems, there are social duties and privileges that are divided by gender or by sex, rather. And in this case, the primary bardic responsibility is in the women's half of the society. So it's a woman, she bears the title of Kahinta, named after a character in the this epic. And one of her tasks, whoever is the Kahinta at this time, at any given time, one of her tasks is to retell the epic in such a way as to indirectly comment on current social and political circumstances. So the last thing I'm going to read is just a little segment from the Dream of Garna. The main plot of the epic concerns the relation between the servant caste in Sangernad, this is sort of in Once Upon a Time land because it's the epic, but Sangernad is just the Sangari Empire in the in the interwar years when the main story takes place. There's a servant caste, and the servant caste, though the majority of the people in the empire are extremely, well, they're not slaves, but they're sort of barely above the level of slaves. And they engage in a sort of massive rebellion that forms the climax of the epic. And I'll just read one section from that. As it happens, the leader of the servant caste, who are the precursors of the Samoans, their leader, who is Garna, in a sort of Moses-like scenario, leads them out of Sangernad to south of the empire to where we know from the rest of the novel Samota is currently located, in terms of the novel, currently located. And as it happens, also Moses-like, he was abandoned as a child and raised by parents who weren't his own, but in this case the parents were servant caste, and his actual, the adopted parents were servant caste, and the actual parents were ruling caste. And so, as in the Mahabharata, from which I drew this the main structure here, Garna's 5 younger brothers are actually the ruling family of Sangernad. And he only learns that the night before the battle begins, when his birth mother comes and announces this to him and asks him not to kill any of his makes him promise not to kill any of his brothers, which he immediately realizes he's going to do. So I'll just read a little bit from that, just to give you a flavor of the epic, and then I'll turn it back to Tushar and Lolita.
Just 88. No,
228.
328.
Okay. So he's killed the 4 brothers, and the 5th, the most powerful brother and the favorite of their mother, named Drugana, is still alive. This is their battle. It's a chariot battle. Well, that'll be obvious. So he reflects that they've all died, and then this is in first person from Garna's point of view. But not Drugana, the ever favorite, the beloved child. He rolled in agony across the thick grass, struggling to breathe. Then I remembered. Makande, that is their mother. Makande had begun a fast to protect her darling child, curly-haired Drugana. It was her sacrifice that kept him living. When I approached, I heard him gasping for mercy, saying that his death would kill Makande too. Quote, "Would you be the killer of your mother also?" Unquote. I dropped my sword. It clattered against the base of the car, and the horses stood still, and the reins slipped from my hand. I thought that was the end, but Drugana pressed his hands against his head and cried out, a sudden, piercing, inarticulate cry. The horses reared and bolted and drove toward Drugana as if they were possessed or mad. Their eyes were huge, and foam formed thick ridges about their bits, and nothing I did would stop them. They did not trample Drugana, crushing his chest beneath their hooves, but the chain around his neck that serves to mark the office of a king caught on the draft pole or the axle. We dragged him halfway round the field, and his troops saw their great leader's clothes shredded on the rocks, and his skin scraped down to mottled patches of muscle, fat, and blood. Many of them ran in fear, seeing their hero, their great warrior, never defeated, never defeatable, skinned like the carcass of a pig before a royal wedding. From that moment, I knew that we had won. Finally, the horses moved to leave the field. They ascended the short hill and tore us over the blunt ridge that banks the road. The repulse broke Drugana free from the bolt at last. His mouth opened. Incredible, but I think he was still alive. His head fell just before the wheel as we turned again, and then there was a huge, sharp sound, sickening to hear, like the sacrifice of a calf at a Sangari altar when the skull is crushed by the mallet. That was the last sound I heard that day. From then on, all was silence, as if I were immersed in water or surrounded by the dull, rough noise of wind through thick trees, their leaves brown and dry, now swirling around me. The horses continued coursing madly along the road, driven by the same furious gods that battered us to violence. Everywhere I saw the one identical scene: children frightened and confused, cowered in the shadows, trembling and ragged beneath turned carts or in black ruins of home. Some sat beside a disfigured corpse, curled into a knot, rolling back and forth, their eyes huge and blank as the twin pools before the royal palace, dull, fathomless, reflecting the infinite blue of a liquid sky. Women, neighbors, comrades, relatives by marriage or by birth, tore their garments, gestured violently against the heavens and at me, whirling past in a cloud of dust, my hands tight against the board of the rattling car, unable to retrieve the rope and rein in the mares. Men too wept or raged. There were grandfathers rocking like the children. Their lips moved and their heads nodded in slow rhythm, and I knew that they were chanting verses for the dead, though they had no oil to pour out for the ceremony, and they did not even know which corpse they mourned, which clod of rotting meat, mutilated, indistinguishable, was once the child, wife, brother, daughter they had loved. But of all this, of the women's curses and cries, keening of the men's, of the women's curses and cries and keening, of the men's brute moans and misdirected prayers, I heard nothing. All about me was silence or a grating din like waves breaking against the shore. As I saw them through the dust of the chariot wheels, and the gray smoke of the smoldering houses, in frenzy or paralysis according to their different circumstances or capacities. I realized that I could not recall the sound of their voices, people I had known since childhood. I grew up hearing them converse, and since I had returned, I spoke with some of them every day, but I could not now imagine the rhythm of their words, contours of pitch, the accent, shape of vowels and of consonants forming on their lips and tongues. And I thought, no one will ever hear this. In all of human time, if men and women live in this place 100,000 years, it will all be silent, and all this pain will make no difference to the hearts and minds of men and women, boys and girls who cross this field in the consuming tasks of daily life. It will be at most a faint hush in the background, a muffled sound of blood and bones beneath the surface of the earth, which every day bears up our steps and lets us move in circling paths we think are straight. Thank you.
Do you want us to read the parts that we said we will read, or should we ask questions?
Whatever you think is good.
Well, my part is very, it's a poem, because there are some poems also in this. And this is a poem in which the speaker persona is a woman mourning her husband, because it's war, civil war and different kinds of war, and lots of women have lost their husbands either in prison or disappeared or whatever. So this is the women outside. Another song today is the passage. Here it's on 218. Another wartime eulogy. Now or earlier, it could have memorialized anyone, a husband, anybody. Long elaboration of his attributes, idealizing as Petrarch, then the end. So this is the poem now. But now my man is nowhere to be seen. The air no longer touches his sweet face. The lake no longer draws arms around his waist, slim as a string of blue-black pearls, fastened at a girl's neck. Now there is no trace of him, not in his father, not in his child. He himself is formless water, breathes a warp in air, where light will not go straight and violate a memory, dear to earth, of when he fell, bleeding in her dark arms. Now he is particles of dust, fragments of black ash, random as remembrance. But every moment I pass within our house, I breathe him in and out. Like smoke from the fire of sacrifice that burns the lungs, but brings us all closer to the life source and moon. My note to this is that the smoke from the fire of sacrifice is Homa.
Yeah.
Because Homa is the god of, the Rigveda god of sacrifice, the fire sacrifice. So, and Homa is smoking.
Yeah, they have the same word for the goddess,
Yeah.
the primary deity.
So,
Maybe I'll read
you read
a
your
little
passage,
excerpt. So, as you've already heard, there's so many voices in this book. I mean, Sharon brought up Ulysses
Yeah.
and Patty's great accent.
The Irish, that was very good.
You heard the Mahabharata, you heard Igmo cosmology, you heard how shitty British colonial notes sound like from the Ethnographical Society.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to show you a completely different voice, and this is also within the Garuna. This is the dream of Garuna, and there's an enactment of part of the epic within the epic, so it's self-referential. She found the book. It was a series of hymns. One was Samotan. The musicians assumed the music was shared too, and so they translated the symbols and interpreted the music of the Nigri. A series of dissonant chords played on the flutes, punctuated by low drums, then silence, Sharp claps, then again flutes, and the drums. It sounded strange. They had never heard music like this. Could they have made a mistake? None of the musicians felt confident that this was right. It didn't seem to be music at all. But when the men and the women put on the masks and began to dance, the music led and shaped the tone of words until all those present thought, this is what beauty must have been. Now it is something we can barely recognize. I could go on, but I'll stop.
We also, Tushar and I were saying to Patrick, because there's a lot of different tones and voices, but there's lots of different emotions, and there's a lot of sexual descriptions. So we wanted Patrick to read one of the skinny hot sexual scenes, but he said no, it would not.
We weren't supposed to share that.
Okay.
She's going off script.
Yeah, I'm going off script, yeah. I was not agreeing on this. Anyway. So my first question is long, so I wrote it up so that I don't forget it. So my question is, would it be right to say that your book starts where Katsia's waiting for the barbarian leaves off? Because what he does, the magistrate in that novel is in the same situation as A somewhat. Because he goes to prison on behalf of the natives and he fights the colonial administration, and he, early on he goes along with a lot of stuff because he's also naive, but then once he realizes what they're doing, then he fights on behalf of the barbarians. But what is interesting, he's an amateur archaeologist. He's just a business degree and doing the business sort of stuff. But he gets interested in the culture and he does some digging and he finds some tablets, but he has no way of finding what the script is, and he's not a trained ethnographer like A is. So would it be right to say that you make, and also he saves this barbarian girl who has no name in there, and but she remains inaccessible to him as a person. And she lives in his house, he saves her, he gives her shelter, but my students always find that relationship troublesome because she doesn't, come out as a person. So would it be right to say that you make that otherness of Africa or whatever it is, some colonized space, you make it, you go into their stories, so you make something that's opaque in Katsia, and he won the Nobel Prize for that book, and you make that accessible and concrete.
I tried to. I mean, I didn't plan it, that part of it as a response to Katsia, so, I mean, I wasn't doing it for that reason, but, yeah, Katsia, Katsia in that novel there's no possibility of translation. The script he finds doesn't seem to be the script of either the barbarians or the fisher people.
Which novels is? Which of the Katsia's novels is?
Waiting for the Barbarians. So it doesn't seem to be a script that's in living use.
Right.
Of course, the people are there, and they have their cultural practices and they have their living languages, but he doesn't seem to take any interest in learning those.
Right.
He's interested sort of only in this script, which he can't possibly decipher. It's a sort of, he needs a Rosetta Stone.
Right,
In order to decipher it, yeah, because there don't seem to be living speakers. But as I say, there are living speakers of the then current languages that are available. Who don't interest him. I didn't reflect on that. I didn't say, well, I have to make up for that difficulty in Katsia, but it just seemed sort of obvious. I mean, it was just the sort of natural thing to do, to try to fill in translations. And Of
But if
course.
somebody taught those books together.
Oh, yeah, that would be,
In a post-colonial, class.
I'd
you
be
could have-
delighted.
Yeah, the students could then put Cahinta, and so
Exactly.
the other women in the barbarian girl's place.
Exactly.
Who remains kind of blank, and their culture remains blank. So I was thinking of that, like it would be in a post-colonial back, even an undergraduate class,
Oh, yeah.
if somebody would teach them together.
And that would work especially well if the instructor made the students aware of the degree to which Cahinta has control over the variations in what is reported
Right.
in the epic. And there are many points at which the epic quite clearly parallels things that A is reported elsewhere have occurred during the
Occupation.
yes, the then current occupation.
Right.
So, that's presumably not coincidence, but something that Cahinta has self-consciously has put into the, revision of the epic that she's delivered and that he is, translating.
It's also people who read this book are the same sorts of people who read Waiting for Barbarians.
Yes, yeah.
And people who would use it in a class would be people who are interested in Katsia's book.
Yeah, and which
So-
I think is a great book,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I would be delighted.
So my next question is related to that, which is that, would you be comfortable with, like if I was teaching this book in the class, that what I would introduce if I was doing the pair, Katsia, as Waiting for the Barbarians, which I've taught many times, and your book, that I think that Katsia's book what it does it brilliantly, but it's a post-colonial novel. And this is an epic, and it's a global epic. It has focus on colonialism and imperialism and wars that are related to colonialism perpetrated by those sorts of situations, but it's actually with the governor's story that's a big part of it, Cahinta being the bard and all of that it's a global epic. And I say that because your poem, the goddess is itself an epic, so it seems to me that you are drawn more towards the epic one. And there was a lot of the section you were reading, I was thinking about Iliad,
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking about Divine Comedy in the opening section, Dante and a lot of other,
The Aeneid
Aeneid, yeah.
and the Mahabharata.
Yeah, and the
again.
Mahabharata.
I was thinking of Hecuba mourning as you were.
Oh,
reading.
absolutely.
Yeah, Trojan women,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely,
So
no,
when you read a particular section that does actually allude to Astyanax and Trojan,
yeah.
so are you drawn more towards epic?
Yeah, I think I probably am, with the qualification that it's an anti-war epic, which is not standard
Yeah.
for epics.
Yeah, because epics are often glorifying war, but
Yeah.
it's a modern epic.
Though it fits with large sections of Mahabharata in that respect.
Yeah,
We were talking the other day about, I just looked at the, what's it called? Anugita.
Anugita.
There's a revised version of the Bhagavad Gita that comes later in the Mahabharata that nobody pays much attention to. But one of the things that says there are two main, there's Kashyapa and a Brahmin were the two main speakers in this poem. They're engaged in dialogue, and when Kashyapa asks the Brahmin, what is the worst sin? The Brahmin says, the worst sin of all is causing harm to any living being, which is very much not the message of the Mahabharata, in which Krishna tells Arjuna to fight the battle. So it has both, but I see the epic element of the novel, of this novel, as aligned with the Anugita in that respect.
Well, I'll add on that apart from anti-war, you also are a champion of the lower class
Yeah,
castes,
yes,
which is not epic at all.
It's
No,
not
that's
epic at
true.
all, because
That's
epic
very
is
true.
focused on, but it's modern epic, so. Like
It's
Premchand's
an
Godan,
orchestral.
Premchand's Godan is seen as modern epic.
Yes, you're
So
right.
Premchand's
You're right.
Godan is a novel, but
Yeah.
it's an epic novel.
You're right.
So,
5-minute warning.
5-minute
thank
warning.
you. Should we, do you
Open
want
Do
to
you
up.
wanna open it up for some does
Yeah.
anyone have any
That's
questions?
yes.
say?
You said you wanted to participate, that's my last
So I
round.
have a question. I've seen, love this something.
Sharon has a question.
I kinda have a question. First of all, I'm so excited about this work for you. You're able to draw on your literary background and the cognitive, emotional, story arcs, and it sounds incredible. I'm really happy to see you do that. It's just a new way. But my question is about the names, simple question. Tell me again the name of the
Oops.
place.
Oh, Samota.
Samota. So you have, how do you get the names? How do you think of a syllabic pattern?
I don't
or-
actually remember what I did, how I got the place names, because I first drafted this 25 years ago. The character names are mostly taken from literature, but with some systematic transformation. I've mentioned this to both Tushan and Lolita. When I first drafted this, I actually outlined a series of principles of Samoan language and its relation to like Kalan and Proto-Indo-European even. It wasn't detailed, but so that, one place name I remember is Zantohak. I don't remember how I came up with that sound, but being it's a communal space of some sort, so sometimes towns or villages are named something Hak. And sometimes just there's a central meeting place where again in the dual sex system, either of the main constituencies would meet for meetings treating their primary concerns. So that's often combined then with another word to distinguish which Hak it is. And in the case of the place that houses the Grove of Peace, it's Zantohak. And you two can't answer because I know you already know. But any guesses as to what this is? I envisioned Samoan as an Indo-European language. Any guess as to what familiar but foreign word might have given rise to Zanto and Zantohak? Grove of Peace. It's where the Grove of Peace.
Shanti.
Yeah, the Sanskrit word for peace, and it becomes the SH changes. The feature of voicedness is added, and it's changed from one sibilant to another. Well, actually, that is just the voicing. So it's. Oh no, it's z. Yeah, so it isn't just the voicing. It's voicing, and it's also made alveolar. Not that you need those technical details, but that's how I got that place name. I don't really remember how I came up with Samota,
And
Sangari, and Kalan.
They sound good.
Kalan sounds like science
Sound
fiction
cool.
to me. I like that.
It does.
Parts of the dream of Garuna could be fantasy.
Oh yeah, they could certainly. That's certainly true.
Why is the government, why is it a dream? Why couldn't it be narration?
Oh, no, it refers to.
Laughing at it.
She's gonna swoop down.
I know.
It refers to a specific part of the poem where when Garna is when Mikahande, who is Garna's birth mother comes and tells him,
Yeah, I know,
What
that's
is-
that's from the Mahabharata, yeah.
comes and tells him that he's her eldest born child, and he was born before she married, and she abandoned him, but you should know that actually she offers, well, this part was cut out, so this isn't in the novel as it exists, but in the Mahabharata, as in the Mahabharata, she actually, I don't remember, does she in the Mahabharata offer to bring him into the fold of the?
No, she doesn't, she
Okay.
doesn't make any, she makes the promise that, he confronts her, like the words current.
Oh, no, I know that.
He confronts her, complains and that now she's remembering her, then he promises her that you have five, six children you have at the beginning of the war, at the end of the war, you still have 5 children.
Oh, right, yeah.
And, he says that you change that, he kills the other brothers.
Yeah, he kills all
He says
of them.
that he will not engage in combat with any of the other children,
Yeah.
but with Arjuna he will.
Yeah, no,
So
Yeah.
in your rewriting of it, he kills
all the
them in
5
one go.
brothers, yeah.
Because he could have killed them in Mahabharata. That's why he promises that he won't engage
Appreciate
in
it.
combat with them in the battlefield, but he would engage in combat with Arjuna.
Anyway, I
So
was,
that either he will die or Arjuna will die, and
Yeah.
she'll still have the same number of children.
anyway, that was a sort of peripheral point that I was just asking. I couldn't remember whether she offered him the option of joining their
I
side.
don't remember that, do you?
I can't recall. It was in an earlier version of this.
But
But
that's-
I
anyway,
think it's as you described.
She couldn't
doesn't.
because he is working on behalf of the other man.
yeah, I know, but never mind. Anyway, it's irrelevant to answering your question. I just said something that I would, that it.
She is not promising him in the Mahabharata.
That's what I guessed.
Yeah, anyway, it was in an earlier version of this.
It was an
But,
earlier version.
it's not there now, so there's no fact about that for the novel either. But what I was gonna say was, once she announces this and asks him not to kill any of his brothers, and he promises not to kill any of his brothers, and then, as I mentioned before, immediately indicates that he's going to. As if it were a film and cut to another scene, we shift to Garna approaching his adoptive mother, and she gives us an argument against war and tells him that it doesn't matter what has happened in the past. It's only extending the cruelty and pain to engage in war. And she briefly convinces Garna not to engage in warfare. And then he hears a cock crowing in the distance, and his adoptive mother is walking away. She'd been doing laundry at the riverside, and he hears a cock crow again, and she continues walking away. And then she disappears, and he can't see her, and then the cock crows a third time, and he wakes up to news that the ruling 5 brothers, that his mother has died, meaning the adoptive mother, and that the 5 brothers have started a fire that has burned all of the residents of the homes of the servant caste residents. And he then changes his resolution and decides on the war. And so the Dream of Garna is referring to that argument that he should not engage in war.
I hate to end this discussion, but it's almost, we've got about 15 minutes left before closing time, and I want some mingling time and an opportunity
Yes.
for people to have their
Yeah,
books
for
signed.
sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, thank you.